A question we're asked by many CTOs and CFOs these days is, how do you make money from data? Many companies are sitting upon very large repositories of data, and there's a question mark about, well, is it worth anything? And how could you make money from it? Today, more than 87% of all company value is driven by digital and intangible assets, including not just data, but brands, software code, and confidential information. These assets are critical to long-term company growth and represent major sources of potential value. Yet often, when companies are looking at these assets, they are viewed as a cost center rather than as a revenue generator or value contributor. Digital assets often sit under the control of the Chief Information Officer, the CIO, or sometimes the Chief Technology Officer, the CTO. However, in today's environment, data is a core business asset and needs to be treated as such. Management teams can no longer afford to erroneously see data and other digital assets as an IT issue or as a cost center. If you want to make money from data, it isn't enough to just understand how you can extract data from a technical perspective. You also need to understand the business case and the potential risks, costs, and returns to determine whether this is a path that is worthwhile going down. The first thing to understand about how to make money from data is how not to do it. An approach we often see companies taking is to say, well, we have heaps of data, so it must be worth something. Let's just start monetizing it, without understanding even basic issues, such as the likely return on investment from the monetization effort, or whether the data end use case is even legal. In other instances, we see decisions based on completely arbitrary factors. Companies might say, well, each piece of data cost me, or is worth, or I make $10 from, and since I have 10 million pieces of data, my data must be worth 100 million, and therefore I'm a millionaire. In other words, there's some kind of multiplication of an underlying cost or value or revenue from a single data point, and this is what the company uses to value the data. The irony of using one data point to value a whole set of data seems to be lost on them. Many people talk about data being the new oil, and this is true to a certain extent. Data is like oil in that it is only potentially valuable. If you think about it, even if you find oil bubbling up in your backyard, it is only potentially valuable to you. You'll need funds to actually get the oil out of the ground and eventually refine it into something useful. During this process, there are any number of risks that need to be managed. If you don't mitigate these risks, then the likelihood of a catastrophe and/or a cost blowout are high. If you switch out oil for data in this scenario, then all the same points hold true. If you want to monetize the data you hold, the first step is to identify the various end use cases for that data set. From there, you need to build a business case for each relevant data end use case. It is important to note that each set of data might have multiple different end use cases, and each end use case might in turn have multiple business cases. The more end use cases you are able to identify and build business cases for, the more likely you are to be able to accurately determine the value of the data overall. Building a business case for each end use scenario enables you to understand the potential economic return from that particular data asset in a particular context. This enables you to justify the investment required to deploy that business case. It also enables you to evaluate the likely returns versus the costs and risks associated with trying to extract value from that data. In this sense, data should be treated by management to the same kind of cost, benefit, and return on investment analysis that you would for any other asset. Think it through. If your company suddenly discovered it had an abandoned piece of real estate, then prior to any decisions being made about what to do with that land, you would first ask some basic questions. What is the nature and quality of this real estate? What can we do with it? For example, do we put our own factory on it? Can we develop it into apartments? Should we lease the land to somebody else? Or should we sell it in its entirety? In this scenario, you'd see the management team look at all its various options. It would consider what kind of revenue each option would generate, the costs associated with each option, the likely risks, and what the return on investment would be for each option. This information would enable the business to know what the best risk-adjusted return on investment from the monetization of the land would be. Data is absolutely the same. Management teams and boards need to ask, what data does the business generate or have access to? What different end-use cases can be applied to that data? And for each end-use scenario, a business case should be built that estimates how much money can be made from using that data in that context, what the costs are associated with doing so, and what are the potential risks associated with leveraging the data. From here, management teams are then in a position to be able to say which, if any, of the end-use cases stack up and determine which ones to take forward. This should be obvious, but unfortunately most people treat data as if it is a unique resource that doesn't obey the normal rules of business. In fact, data is like any other business asset and should be treated as such. The fundamental business principles of building business end-use cases still apply, and in fact are critical if the end goal is to monetize your data.